The grand throne hall of Valtheris burned with golden light. Massive alien banners hung from high pillars, each painted with the mark of victory, and none of them belonged to humans. The air smelled of pride and old war. At the end of the hall sat Queen Virella, ruler of the Karith Dominion, tall, graceful, and feared. Her eyes were sharp like twin blades of silver, and her voice carried power that could silence a crowd. When she spoke, even soldiers bowed lower. Before her stood a single human, Captain Rian Cole. No armor. No guards. Just a man in a worn black jacket, standing in a hall filled with enemies. He looked small, fragile even, surrounded by warriors twice his size, their armor glowing with alien symbols. The queen rose from her throne slowly. "So this is the human envoy," she said, her tone cold and mocking. "The one who dares speak of peace after burning our ships and defying our council." Rian looked up at her calmly. "I came to end the blood," he said simply. The hall laughed, harsh, cruel laughter. One of the generals, a massive alien with red scales, stepped forward. "End the blood? Human, your kind started it." But Rian didn't flinch. He just looked at the queen. "Maybe," he said, "but it doesn't have to continue." The queen's eyes narrowed. There was something about his calm voice that irritated her. No fear. No trembling. Only quiet strength. It reminded her of something she hated, humility without weakness. She turned to her war champion. "Corthel," she commanded, "show our guest what becomes of those who insult the throne." From the shadows stepped Corthel, a mountain of muscle wrapped in black armor. His 4 eyes glowed red beneath a horned helmet. The floor shook as he walked. The crowd cheered his name, chanting for blood. Rian exhaled softly. "A duel then?" The queen smiled cruelly. "Not a duel," she said. "A lesson. You will fight my champion, and when you lose, you will kneel before my throne and beg to serve." Rian nodded once. "If I lose?" Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, then she laughed. "If you lose, human." The hall cleared. The banners swayed as guards formed a circle around the center. The queen watched from her throne, her chin resting on one hand, eyes gleaming with interest. Rian stepped forward. He had no weapon, no armor, only a light staff at his back. Corthel raised a massive blade the size of a man. "Begin," the queen said softly. The champion roared and charged, the ground trembling. His sword came down with a deafening crash. Dust exploded. The crowd shouted in triumph, but then fell silent. The blade had hit empty air. Rian had moved. He sidestepped with impossible precision, calm as a whisper. Corthel swung again, faster, harder. Each time, Rian ducked, turned, or stepped aside. The movements were small, clean, almost peaceful. "You mock me, human?" Corthel roared. Rian didn't answer. He only said, "You're fighting your anger, not me." The crowd hissed. The queen leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Corthel growled and lunged again, but Rian caught his wrist, twisted, and with a single strike of his staff, disarmed him. The giant's blade clattered to the floor. Gasps filled the hall. Rian stepped back. "Yield," he said quietly. Corthel roared in fury and swung his fist, only to find himself slammed to the ground, face first, the human's knee pressing against his back. Silence. Every alien froze. The great champion lay defeated, his armor cracked, his pride broken. Rian stood, breathing slowly, and offered his hand. "Get up," he said. Corthel looked at him, confused, angry, ashamed, but he took the hand. The queen's jaw clenched. She rose slowly, the metal steps echoing under her feet. The hall trembled with tension. Her voice was sharp as lightning. "What are you?" Rian looked up at her. His voice was calm, but his words carried power. "Just human," he said. "That's all." For the first time, no one laughed. The queen stared at him, and for a moment, something flickered in her silver eyes. Not hatred. Not rage. Something she didn't understand. She turned away sharply. "Take him," she ordered, her voice trembling with restrained anger. "He will pay for this insult." But deep inside, her heart whispered something she could not silence. He fought with no hate, and still won. As guards led Rian away, the queen stood alone in the glow of her throne. Her hand rested on her crown, her thoughts storming. This was not how it was supposed to end. Her champion defeated. Her pride wounded. And the human, still standing tall. The hall was still silent long after the human had left. Blood from the queen's champion marked the marble floor, a crimson reminder of humiliation. The alien nobles whispered like snakes in the shadows, their voices trembling between fear and disbelief. The queen sat upon her throne, her silver eyes cold and unreadable. The laughter she expected never came. Instead, there was a weight in the air, the kind that comes when an empire realizes its pride has cracked. Korthal, her mighty champion, knelt before her. His voice was low and ashamed. "My queen, I failed you." Her hand tightened around her armrest. She wanted to strike him, to scream, but something in her stopped. It wasn't just anger. It was confusion. How had a single human defeated a warrior born for war? How had he shown no fear even when surrounded by death? "Leave me," she said coldly. "All of you." The court obeyed in silence. When the last echo of footsteps faded, Queen Virella stood alone in the empty hall. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished floor, proud, furious, but uncertain for the first time in years. "Just human," she whispered to herself, remembering his words. Her hand touched her chest, feeling her heartbeat race, something no enemy had ever caused before. At dawn, she called her council. The high nobles arrived, wearing jeweled armor and proud faces that barely hid their fear. One of them spoke first. "My queen, we cannot allow this insult to stand. The human must be executed." "Executed?" she repeated softly. "You forget the laws of sacred combat." Another noble hissed. "Then exile him. Send him back to his dying planet." The queen's lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't amusement. It was calculation. "No," she said, rising from her throne. "He will not die. He will not leave." The council looked confused. She turned to them, her voice sharp like steel. "Let all worlds know this. The man who defeated my champion shall be punished by honor itself." They frowned. "Punished? How, my queen?" Virella's gaze turned distant, almost coldly poetic. "By binding him to me," she said. "By marriage." The room erupted in shock. The nobles shouted, protested, begged her to reconsider. But she silenced them with a glare. "If he wishes peace, he shall have it, through me. If he thinks himself equal, let him stand beside me, not before me." In her heart, she told herself it was revenge. But somewhere deeper, quieter, another voice whispered, or maybe curiosity. Rian was brought before her again, guarded by soldiers who hated him but feared touching him. His face was calm as ever, a bruise on his cheek the only mark of the fight. The queen watched him approach. Every step he took seemed to challenge the air itself. "You were given a chance to leave alive," she said. "You should have taken it." He tilted his head. "You'd prefer I ran?" "I'd prefer you remembered your place." He smiled faintly. "And where is that?" Her silver eyes narrowed. "At my side," she said. "In chains of honor." He frowned slightly. "Chains?" "Yes," she declared. "By the law of sacred victory, you cannot be killed. But I will not allow your pride to go unpunished. You humiliated my people, my champion, my throne. So you will become my consort. My husband, by command of the crown." The court gasped. Even the guards froze. Rian studied her for a long moment. "Marriage, as punishment," he said softly. "Strange culture." Her jaw tightened. "Do you refuse?" He met her gaze without flinching. "No." Her voice faltered for the first time. "No." He nodded once. "If this is your law, then I'll obey it. Perhaps peace begins with strange things." The queen didn't know how to respond. No fear. No anger. Just quiet acceptance, the kind that made her feel like the walls were closing in on her pride. "Then it is done," she said finally. "Prepare the ceremony." Later that night, alone in her royal chamber, Queen Virella stood before her mirror. She removed her crown and looked at her reflection, a ruler who had conquered worlds, now forcing herself into a union she couldn't explain. Marriage as punishment, she whispered, her own voice bitter. Why does it not feel like victory? Beyond the window, the alien moon rose over the city of towers. Somewhere below, Rian sat quietly in his assigned quarters, staring at the stars. He thought of Earth, its blue skies, its fragile peace. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "She thinks this is punishment, maybe it's the beginning." The next morning, the city of Valferis awoke to chaos. News spread fast. The queen was to marry a human. Some called it blasphemy. Others called it strategy. And a few, silently, called it destiny. As the queen prepared for the ceremony, one of her handmaidens dared to ask, "My queen, why him?" Virella paused, her hand frozen on her crown. Her voice was quiet. "Because he refused to kneel, even when I wanted him to." The palace of Valferis had never felt so quiet. Servants walked faster, guards spoke softer, and nobles avoided the throne hall. The reason was clear: the queen had married a human. What was meant to be a punishment had become an open wound to her pride. Every corner of the palace whispered the same question. Why him? In the royal chambers, Rian Cole sat beside a window that overlooked the alien city. He could see twin moons hanging over the horizon, their silver light painting strange patterns on the towers below. He was no prisoner in chains, yet he was never truly free. Everywhere he went, eyes followed, cold, curious, or hateful. Still, he never complained. He trained quietly each morning, spoke politely to the servants, and bowed to none. The queen watched him from afar more often than she wanted to admit. One evening, she entered his quarters unannounced. He stood near the window, gazing out at the alien night. "You seem comfortable," she said, her tone sharp, hiding the curiosity in her heart. He turned slightly, offering a calm smile. "It's peaceful up here. Your city looks beautiful from this height." "Do not flatter me, human," she replied coldly. "Beauty does not hide shame." "Maybe not," he said softly. "But sometimes, it hides pain." Her eyes narrowed. "You dare speak to me like that?" "I speak to you as someone who sees what others pretend not to," he said. "You built walls around yourself, not just stone, but pride." The queen stepped closer, her voice dropping. "And what would you know of my pride?" Rian met her gaze. "Enough to know it's not pride that rules you, Your Majesty. It's loneliness." For a long moment, neither spoke. The alien wind moved through the balcony curtains, carrying silence between them. Then she turned away sharply. "You forget your place," she said, her voice trembling. He smiled faintly. "You keep trying to give me one." That night, the queen could not sleep. She walked through the gardens, her thoughts a storm. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the way he stood calm in a hall of enemies, the way he spoke without fear. "Why can't I break him?" she whispered to the stars. Her guard, Corthal, approached quietly. "My queen," he said, bowing low. "The council grows restless. They say the human must be removed, before your people lose faith." She looked at him. "Do you also believe that?" Corthal hesitated. "He defeated me fairly. I bear him no hatred, but the people do. They will not understand mercy." "Then let them try to understand something greater," she said. The guard frowned. "And what is that?" She looked up at the moons. "Control. I can turn even a human into a lesson. They will learn to fear compassion." But deep down, she didn't believe her own words. Days turned into weeks. The strange marriage continued like a silent war. They dined together but barely spoke. They walked the same halls but never touched. Yet every exchange between them felt like a battle. One fought not with blades, but with glances. Sometimes, the queen caught him teaching her young guards small tricks of human strategy, how to read movement, how to anticipate fear. When she scolded him, he only said, "I'm not teaching them to fight humans. I'm teaching them to survive." That answer stayed with her long after. One evening, as the sun set behind the alien spires, she found him tending a wounded bird in the courtyard. The tiny creature's wing had been broken. He wrapped it gently in a strip of his shirt, his hands steady, his expression soft. She watched quietly, unseen, and felt something unfamiliar stir inside her, something dangerous. He looked up suddenly, catching her gaze. "Even the smallest life matters," he said quietly. "Your world forgets that sometimes." Her voice softened before she could stop it. "And yours remembers too easily." He smiled. Maybe that's why peace needs both. For a moment, she forgot he was her punishment. He was just a man, fragile, kind, stubborn, and impossible to understand. That night, the queen sat by her window, the crown lying on the table beside her. She stared at the reflection of the city lights and whispered, "He is supposed to make me stronger, not weaker." But strength now felt different. It wasn't about conquering worlds anymore, it was about facing the one person who refused to kneel. In the shadows of the palace, the council watched. They whispered their plots, sharpening their knives in silence. The idea of a human sitting beside their queen filled them with fury. "The human changes her," one hissed. "Then we must change him," another replied darkly. Outside, thunder rolled across the alien sky. The coming storm was not of rain, but rebellion. And in her chambers, the queen looked out toward the horizon, her heart whispering the truth she could no longer deny. He was never the one in chains. I was. The city of Valferis had begun to change. The banners still waved above the palace, but the whispers underneath had grown darker. The queen's marriage to a human had cracked something inside the empire, pride, faith, fear, no one could tell which. Outside the walls, protests filled the air. Inside, silence ruled. The queen could feel it. The glances from her guards, the hesitation in her servants' hands, it was no longer respect. It was doubt. And all because of him. Rian Cole stood in the training hall that morning, facing 3 alien guards with spears pointed at him. They wanted to test him again, or perhaps provoke him. He didn't fight. He simply moved, dodging every strike with quiet precision, until they grew too tired to continue. "Enough," he said gently. "You're not fighting me. You're fighting fear." The youngest of the guards threw down his weapon. "You think you can teach us courage, human?" Rian looked at him. "No. I think you already have it. You just forgot how to use it." Queen Virella had been watching from the balcony above. She wanted to scold him for speaking to her soldiers that way, but the truth was, his words carried weight. She could see how even the humiliated guards walked away, thinking. That frightened her more than his strength ever did. That night, the queen met her council. The old nobles sat around a glowing table, their faces cold and lined with hatred. One spoke first. "The people whisper rebellion, my queen. They say you have been touched by a human's poison." Another added, "If you do not end this mockery, we will lose the loyalty of the outer fleets." The queen's eyes sharpened. "You mean your fleets?" A low growl filled the room. "The Dominion needs strength, not sentiment," one hissed. "You have allowed an enemy into your bed." Her hand slammed against the table. The light flickered. "Enough! You speak as if I've forgotten the blood we spilled for this throne. I rule through power, not love." But even as she said the words, she knew they rang hollow. When the meeting ended, a shadow lingered behind. It was Corthal, her loyal champion, now healed, but quieter than before. "My queen," he said softly, "there are voices plotting against you. They speak of taking your crown." She looked at him. "Do you believe them?" "I believe they fear you've changed." She turned away. "Then perhaps they should." Later that night, the storm finally came. Thunder rolled over the towers, lightning striking the palace walls. The queen sat in her chamber, staring into the fire, lost in thought. Rian entered quietly. "You don't sleep much," he said. "Neither do you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "It's hard to rest when you live among those who want you dead." Her eyes lifted to his. "And yet you stay." He walked closer, the light flickering across his face. "Because running never fixes what's broken." The silence between them grew soft, almost human. She looked at him, the man who should have been her shame, now her quiet strength. For the first time, she saw not the enemy, but the peace she had always fought against. But peace never comes without a price. The door burst open. A figure lunged through, one of her own guards, his blade drawn, his eyes burning with rage. "For the Dominion!" he screamed, charging at the queen. Before she could react, Rian moved. Faster than she'd ever seen him move before. His hand caught the assassin's wrist, twisted, and drove him to the ground. The blade clattered away. But another attacker leapt from the shadows. The knife flashed, and Rian turned just in time to take it in his side. The queen cried out, her voice shaking the chamber. "No!" He fell to one knee, blood staining his shirt. The guards rushed in, subduing the attackers, dragging them out into the storm. The queen knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" Rian's breath came shallow. "Because," he met her eyes with a faint smile. "You keep trying to punish me, and I keep saving you." She froze. Those words cut deeper than any blade. Hours later, the palace fell quiet again. Rian lay on a bed in the healing chamber, pale but alive. The queen sat beside him, silent, her eyes red from tears she refused to admit were hers. Corthal stood at the door. "The council says this attack was the work of radicals," he said. "But I think it was more than that." She nodded. "They will pay." He hesitated. "And the human?" Her voice softened. "He saved me. Again. If they call him weakness, then perhaps I've misunderstood strength all my life." When Rian woke, he found her still there. The queen of the Kareth Dominion, sitting beside a human, holding his hand. "You should rest," he whispered. "So should you," she replied quietly. Their eyes met, not as enemies, not as ruler and captive, but as two souls tired of endless war. Outside, the storm had passed. The first light of dawn painted the city gold. And for the first time in centuries, Queen Virella didn't see a battlefield. She saw hope. Morning sunlight broke through the clouds of Valtheris, turning the palace towers gold. But for Queen Virella, it brought no peace. Sleep had abandoned her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rian falling, blood on his hands, whispering words that still haunted her. "You keep trying to punish me, and I keep saving you." He had survived the night, though barely. The healers said his wound was deep but clean. He would recover, slowly. And yet, as she stood beside his bed, she couldn't stop thinking of how easily it could have ended. How close she had come to losing the one man who saw her not as a queen, but as a person. For the first time, her throne room felt like a cage. When the council entered that morning, their faces were calm, too calm. "My queen," said the eldest noble, his voice soft as poison, "the people are frightened. The attack on you proves that the human's presence brings danger. For the safety of the Dominion, he must be sent away." Her silver eyes narrowed. "You mean killed?" The noble smiled faintly. "If it must be so." The hall trembled with her rising fury. "He saved my life. While you sat safe behind your walls, he bled for your queen." Another noble leaned forward. "He saved you, perhaps to control you. We cannot risk a human influencing our crown." Something inside her snapped. She rose slowly from her throne. Her voice was calm, too calm. "You forget who sits upon this throne." The councilman fell silent. Her power filled the hall like fire in dry grass. But behind that power, another feeling burned, doubt. Because for the first time, she wondered. Had they always spoken this way? That night, she searched. Through secret archives, old reports, and private transmissions. Hours passed. The palace grew silent around her. And then, she found it. Hidden documents. Records of intercepted messages. Proof that the war between her people and humanity had been manipulated. Not by humans, but by her own council. They had fed her lies. Falsified attacks. Created fear, so they could keep her throne under their control. Every battle, every death, every speech of hate, had been built on their deceit. Her hands trembled as she held the data crystal. "You fools," she whispered. "You made me a weapon." She felt sick, not with anger, but with guilt. For all the blood she had spilled in their name. For the peace she had destroyed. And then, From behind her, a quiet voice spoke. "You finally see it, don't you?" She turned. Rian stood in the doorway, pale but standing, one hand on the wall for balance. "You shouldn't be out of bed," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You shouldn't believe everything you're told." Her eyes glistened. "You knew." "I suspected," he admitted. "Your counsel spoke like men who feared truth more than war." She walked toward him slowly. "And you said nothing?" "I did," he said. "You just weren't ready to listen." The queen sank into a chair, the data crystal glowing faintly in her hand. "All this time, I thought I was protecting my people. I was their sword and their shield." Rian looked at her quietly. "You were both. They just made sure the sword stayed sharper than the shield." She looked up at him, her voice breaking. "What kind of ruler am I if I couldn't even see the truth?" "The kind who can change it," he said softly. "That's more than most ever do." She stared at him, this fragile human, wounded yet stronger than any warrior she had ever known. "You could have left," she whispered. "After what they did to you." He smiled faintly. "And leave you to face them alone? I don't abandon those who still have a chance to do what's right." Her eyes softened. "You risked your life for me. Now you risk your future." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. "Some risks are worth taking." For the first time, she didn't see a human or an enemy. She saw a man who had already won the battle she'd never fought, the battle inside her heart. As the night deepened, thunder rolled far in the distance. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She turned to him. "They will come for us," she said. "When they realize I know the truth." Rian nodded. "Then let them." She looked down at the glowing crystal, then at him. "You would fight beside me?" He smiled. "No. I'll fight with you." Her lips curved slightly, not in pride, but in something deeper, almost human. "Then we begin at dawn." Outside, the alien city slept beneath two moons. Inside the palace, a storm was rising, not of rebellion, but of truth. The queen who once ruled through fear now planned to fight for hope. And beside her stood the one she had called a punishment, now her only ally. The morning sky burned red above Valtheris, a color that once meant victory, but now smelled of rebellion. Smoke curled from the far towers. Distant thunder was not from storms this time, it was from guns. The Queen of Kareth, once untouchable, stood on her balcony watching her empire tremble. The council had turned against her. Her own fleets now aimed their weapons toward the palace. And at her side stood Rian Cole, the human once called her punishment, now her only truth. "They are coming," he said quietly, scanning the horizon. She nodded, her voice calm but heavy. "They think they can unmake a throne built from my blood." Rian looked at her. "Then let's show them what it's built from now." Her silver eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, she saw not an alien and a human, but two souls standing against the weight of history itself. Inside the war chamber, her generals argued over strategy, panic infecting every word. "The fleets are dividing, my queen," one shouted. "Half the army still follows the council's orders," another cried. "If we do not surrender, they will burn the palace." The queen raised a hand. Silence fell. Her voice was calm, steady, like steel. "If they wish to burn it," she said, "then we'll light the first flame ourselves." The generals stared in shock. She turned to Rian. "You said once that peace begins with strange things." He nodded slowly. "It does. And it survives through stranger choices." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pride and sorrow. "Then today, I choose not to rule by fear. I choose to fight for the world they lied to me about." Hours later, the city burned. Rebellion swept through the streets like wildfire. The council's private army stormed the palace gates. But the queen did not hide. She walked through the great doors in full royal armor, gold and obsidian, the crest of Kareth glowing faintly across her chest. At her side, Rian wore simple battle gear, his hands steady, eyes sharp. When the first wave reached them, she gave no command. She only whispered, "Now." And the human moved. The palace steps became a storm of chaos. Blades clashed, Plasma burned through the air. Rian fought not like a warrior, but like a ghost, fast, focused, untouchable. Every strike was clean, every motion exact. The queen fought beside him, her sword glowing blue, her every move a dance between grace and wrath. At first, her guards hesitated, unsure if they should follow a human into battle. Then they saw him fight for their queen, not against her. They saw him protect her back, shield her flank, and bleed beside her. And suddenly, the battle changed. The soldiers began to roar her name again. Virella! Virella! For the queen! Even as explosions tore through the courtyard, hope rose higher than the flames. Amid the chaos, Rian's voice cut through the noise. Your people need to see you, not as a ruler, but as one of them. She looked at him, her armor scarred and burning. And what if I fall? He smiled, blood on his lip. Then they'll finally rise. Something in her broke open, not fear, not weakness, but the realization that for the first time, she was no longer alone. By nightfall, the palace steps were covered in smoke and ash. The council soldiers retreated, their banners falling one by one. When the final shot was fired, silence returned, not of defeat, but of survival. The queen stood upon the highest stair, her armor cracked, her crown gone. Rian stood beside her, his hand steadying her shoulder. Below them, thousands of her people gathered, kneeling not out of fear, but respect. The queen raised her voice, strong though weary. You called me your ruler, she said, but today, I stood as your equal. The human you despised fought for the same future I do. Remember this, power means nothing if it cannot protect those who believe in it. The crowd erupted in cheers. For the first time in her reign, she didn't feel distant from them. She felt human. Later, in the quiet of the ruined throne room, Rian stood beside the shattered crown. He looked at her and said softly, "You've won." She shook her head. "No. We've survived. Winning comes next." He smiled. "You sound more human every day." She laughed, tired, but real. "And you," she said, touching his shoulder gently, "sound more like a king." For a long moment, they stood together, watching the dawn rise over their broken city. And in that golden light, the universe changed, not because of war, but because a queen once taught to rule through fear, had learned to love through courage. The war was over. The fires had burned low, leaving only smoke and silence over the great city of Valferis. The banners that once hung for conquest now lay torn across the palace floor. The scent of steel and blood faded into the cold air of dawn. But peace, real peace, had come at a price. Queen Virella stood at the balcony where it all began, her armor cracked, her crown gone. Below her, the people gathered, soldiers, workers, children, eyes filled not with fear, but with something new, trust. Her voice carried across the plaza, soft but strong. "I ruled with pride and blindness," she said. "I believed strength came from making others kneel. But a human showed me the truth, that courage is not in domination, it's in compassion." The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to listen. Rian stood behind her, still wounded but alive, the faint smile on his lips touched with exhaustion. He had seen enough wars to know peace was never quiet, it just sounded different. The queen turned toward him. "I once called you my punishment," she said softly. "But perhaps you were my lesson instead." He bowed slightly, his eyes gentle. "Lessons and punishments aren't so different, Your Majesty. Both hurt, and both can heal." That night, the stars over Valferis glowed brighter than ever before. The palace lights were dimmed, the city finally resting. Rian stood in the queen's garden, gazing up at constellations he could barely name. The air was still. The war was finished. Yet his heart was uneasy, humans were not meant to stay long among alien thrones. He heard soft footsteps behind him. The queen approached, no crown, no guards, only a woman beneath the moonlight. "You plan to leave," she said quietly. He hesitated. "My ship is repaired. My people are waiting." "And yet," she said, stepping closer, "you look like a man who doesn't want to go." He smiled faintly. "I came to stop a war, not to change a queen's heart." She tilted her head. "And yet, you did both." Silence fell between them. the kind that speaks louder than words. They walked through the garden's ruins, flowers burned by battle, trees scarred by plasma fire. "Strange," she said, touching a wilted leaf, "how something so fragile can survive after so much destruction." Rian looked at her. "Because life doesn't ask permission to begin again." She turned to him, her eyes shining silver in the moonlight. "And what of us, Rian Cole? Do we begin again?" He met her gaze steadily. "That depends on what you want, not what your throne demands." She laughed softly, a sound he had never heard from her before. "For once, my heart and my throne are not at war." Then she reached into her armor and removed something, her royal insignia, the emblem of command. She pressed it into his hand. "Once, I wore this to remind others of their place," she said. "Now I give it to remind myself of mine." He looked down at it, the metal still warm from her touch. "And where is that, Your Majesty?" She smiled. "Beside you." At dawn, word spread across the empire. The Queen of Karith had chosen to dissolve the old council and rebuild her rule on a single promise: equality. Humans and Carithians would trade, learn, and live side by side. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy whispered not of conquest, but of hope. Many called her mad. Others called her divine. But to Rian, she was simply Virella, the woman who had traded her pride for peace. Weeks later, as he prepared to leave, the entire city gathered to see him off. The queen stood beside him, dressed not in gold or armor, but in white, the color of rebirth in her culture. When he turned to her for farewell, she whispered, "You came to my world as a threat. You leave as its heart." He bowed, but she stopped him, lifting his chin gently. "No bows," she said softly. "Not between equals." Their eyes met, the human and the queen, once divided by hate, now bound by something that neither language nor law could name. And as his ship rose into the sky, her voice echoed through the palace one last time. "Let the stars remember, the greatest punishment the queen ever received was learning to love what she once feared." Centuries later, the story of the war bride and the human envoy would be taught across 1,000 worlds. A tale not of victory, but of transformation. Of how one human changed the heart of an empire. Of how a queen punished herself, not with pain, but with love.